Help me, please.
It's actually not that bad being homeless. I'm in the Louisville Public Library, and I booked a fancy corner conference room. And who knew you can book a fancy corner conference room even when you're homeless? So a lot of people prefer cafes, but I actually prefer libraries because they're a lot more spacious and nicer. And I already pay taxes, so it's like I won't feel bad for being there. I mean, look at all these books, dude. They actually have manga in public libraries now. Check it out. All right, so a little bit about me. I worked at a Chicago-based proprietary trading firm for most of my career. I've actually jumped between 3 different shops, but they were all prop trading firms or hedge funds. And I came in as a quant trader, and then I tried being a trade desk developer for a little bit. And in my last few years, I was a quantitative researcher. So it was kind of like the triangle, the front office triangle. And, it's fun for, how much money they pay you. But at the end of the day, if you're not motivated by the money anymore, it's kind of stressful. But yeah, to get to the crux of my video, why did I quit my fancy 6-figure job to be homeless? I think it's primarily rooted in the fact that I believe human beings are primarily looking for rich experiences in their life and happiness, and usually the two overlap quite a bit. But I didn't think that continuing to work and increasing my comp in a corporate setting was going to optimize for my happiness or giving me newer and more interesting experiences. And I thought being homeless would. Now I realize that sounds ridiculous to most people, but let me elucidate this point through a series of graphs. All right, so this is the first graph. These are probably the most boring graphs, but please stick to the end because I tie it all together in a neat bow, and it'll be like a epiphany moment, like, oh shit, this guy knows what he's talking about. This is a happiness to income chart. It's a pretty well-known study, I think originally published by the New York Times. Originally it was $75,000 right there, but I moved it up to $100,000 for inflation adjusted. But whatever, there is some rough point at which a person's happiness begins to plateau relative to the increased income that they earn. And you can look this stuff up. But yeah, basically, if you're like in poverty, obviously you're not able to be happy, and then you move your way up. But you'll notice that this doesn't completely flatline, because obviously if you're making $1 million a year, it's better than making $100,000 a year. But why does it plateau? Because once your basic necessities are met, it's hard to buy an equal increment of happiness. And as an example, I'll use like a car. Like if you buy your first car, let's say you buy your first nice car up here, like a Tesla. If you buy a second Tesla here, the second Tesla doesn't double your happiness, but the capital outlay was double, right? You had to buy, you have 2 cars now, and you double the amount of money, but you're not doubly happy, because that's just how it works. Like maybe you're 1.2 times happier, but you're not 2 times happier. So that's kind of a more anecdotal way of explaining this concept. Next graph, stress versus income. Pretty self-explanatory. It's like roughly like a y equals x kind of chart, and this applies mostly to like individual contributors, mostly tech workers, things like that. As the code base you're expected to maintain, the complexity of the problems you're expected to solve keep increasing, and you move up the ranks in that way. Like now they're gonna give you wake-up calls from London, when the exchange connection is down or whatever, and it's like the stress level just is linear, and they'll pay you more, but they just expect you to do more. And there is an exception to this. It's if you make it into some kind of cushy management rule, but those are far and few between. It's like most people want those, and it's like a lot of times you need to like know somebody to get those. Usually you just move up in some form of like individual contribution, and this is linear, whereas this is kind of like plateauing. So when you kind of compare the two, it's like, does this make sense to you? Like if you get the cushy management job and it's has the same shape as this, then the ratio of the two makes sense, right? Like you can justify that. Oh, well, whatever. The job isn't even that much more stressful. I'm not getting that much happier, but they correspond. But this doesn't make sense. This ratio, this to this. So that's the first explanation as to why it didn't make sense for me to just continue down the path of trying to grind my way up the corporate ladder. It just didn't really make business sense, mathematical sense. But then we'll move on to more interesting charts. So next I want to try to graph happiness levels over time for the average person. So, let's take, the average person over their lifetime, and this age is for happiness. As a child, they might like beat their favorite video game, and that's like a little spike up right there. And then let's say like their dog dies and they're sad, and it goes down like that. And then they get to high school and they get a girlfriend. They're really happy about that. They're in love. They lose their virginity. Oh, awesome. Look at that. And then they find out she's cheating on them. Oh no. And crashes. And most people will kind of ride these waves of happiness in their life. And they're hoping to minimize the downside and increase the upside. So the average person is kind of hoping that, get into their favorite college, and then, get their ideal job, like maybe it'll just keep going up, get engaged, get married to the girl they love, have their first child. And this is kind of what they're hoping will happen. And that makes a lot of sense. I think the point I want to try to capture is that, well, I'll explain how this doesn't actually end up being shaped this way later, but I think the point is that you do need to embrace these swings if you want to really appreciate and get rich experiences out of life, because there's more risk-averse people who, they'll try to minimize these swings. So they might, they'll just take fewer risks. So they'll kind of cap their upside in order to also limit their downside. So, let's say, if I'm trying to think of parallel examples to this up here, they won't get a pet, they'll just get a hermit crab because they don't, well, I guess most kids probably don't worry about their dog dying, but whatever. And, that's not as high of a spike there. They won't ask out the girl they like in high school because they're scared of being rejected. So, their happiness will kind of waver sideways like that. They'll go to their hometown college because some of their high school friends are going there and they're too scared to like go across the country and try something new and have no friends. They'll get a job offer in another country, but they're scared again, or they have a promotion where they can switch teams, and they like their current team and their current boss. They don't know what if the new boss is a jerk, so their happiness, it'll kind of meander in this like tighter range. And this is the type of person that I guess would invest in bonds more than stocks. And I think most wealth advisors would tell you that stocks, while they have a higher volatility, they also have a higher average return. And I try to apply that same philosophy in life. So I'm always trying to ride these swings whenever and wherever I can, as long as the calculated risk is good. And I advise against being too risk averse, because it's a suboptimal way of living life, in that you're not going to ever going to achieve like real good high watermarks in happiness. And more to the point, I want to remind people that life is about riding those waves. For both of these people, right? Like let's say this guy gets hit by a bus right here, where he's out like surfing in Australia and he's like really taking big risks, and then he suddenly like smashes into some rocks. Like, that's what happens to him. He just straight up, he's gone. And this happiness is just flat, right? So he's not going to be happy or sad. It's going to be at zero, right? Well, technically it's not zero, because everyone has a different base level of happiness based on like genetics and other factors, but I'll cover that later. But for the average person across the world, let's call it zero. Like, well, when you die, your base level happiness goes to zero. And that's it, you know, and for this guy too, like, it just goes to zero. So what is the point of life, right? Like, if you manage to just kind of be really risk averse, you minimize ups and downs, you're basically dead. Like, I'm not trying to be like really negative, but and that's not what life is about, right? You have the rest of your eternity to sleep and be at zero happiness. So you want to really ride these waves as much as you can. All right, next I want to talk about the hedonic treadmill. Hedonic, like hedonism. You can look it up. It's there's a good Wikipedia entry on it, but the gist of it is that you need to always increase your spending to recapture the same level of happiness that you had before. So in this example, if the y-axis is rent, you know, if you were thrilled to have a $1,000 apartment, you're going to get used to that eventually. And then to get the same thrill, you need to up it to a $2,000 apartment, then $3,000, and that just continues that way. And this concept can be applied not just to things like rent, but like lines of coke that like your junkie friend needs to take to get the same rush. You know, initially he was good with one line of coke, and then next he got used to that. Now he needs two, and he got used to that. Now he needs three, and that's why people who get anything they want, like celebrities, are so often in rehab, because they don't fully grasp this concept. So they keep chasing the happiness that they got from the first hit, and then they just keep increasing it, and then they're in rehab. So you know, it applies to a lot of things, like gambling addicts. You know, they bet $1,000, they got a rush on winning, now they need to bet $2,000, $3,000. And I think at the highest level, it applies to your salary and your annual income. You know, we feel proud and we want to have a higher income, and we get a thrill from it, and it just keeps going. But your happiness level always reverts to its base level happiness. Mathematically, this, you know, I put f of x, this can actually be mapped to this, which is just like a happiness chart. So this sort of like quantifies what I was just explaining. So basically, happiness is the derivative of getting what you want, right? So, you know, you got that first month in the new apartment, and you're thrilled, your happiness spikes. You know, you get this little spike, and then you get used to it, and then now you're talking about, oh, I want the fancy balcony with the view of the lake, and you save up and get promoted at work, you finally get it, and you're thrilled, and you're having your housewarming party, and then, you know, a month or two in, you're used to it, and so now you need the you know, the mansion with the with the whatever fountains and all that crap. So that's kind of like an important concept in terms of like being able to understand your own happiness and how you're wired as a human. But everyone doesn't have the same base level of happiness. That's why I didn't really put a zero here. It's different for each person. And there's a good documentary called Happy on Netflix, but this is like a universally understood pie chart on happiness, which has been like confirmed. Basically, it's 50% genetic, so it's just people have predispositions to being happy just genetically, and I'm sure you've observed that. You know, you got like Eeyore in Winnie the Pooh, who's genetically sad, and I suppose Tigger is genetically happy. And then this 40% mindset is basically, you can really will yourself to be happy if you have the right mindset. And that's what a religion is, frankly. I'm not trying to like dumb down what religion is, but when you go to your Sunday sermon and your pastor is telling you, hey man, be grateful, we got another week, God gave us another week to breathe this fresh air and see our children, like what a blessing to be alive, praise the Lord, like that's mindset. You're sort of counting your blessings and reminding yourself that, oh wow, I do have a good life. There's like someone starving somewhere in the world right now, but look at my life. So that 40% mindset, you can control that if you always see the glass as half full and not half empty. And this 10% everything else is all the things that I'm trying to fine tune with my like life engineering projects. So it's kind of sad to think that if my end goal is happiness, I'm actually only talking about that 10%. But as far as what you feel, the 40 and 50% are mostly static. So that 10% actually feels it feels quite weighty. So yeah, I'll move on to the next point. I suppose I'll pose a question to you, which is if you could, in your original getting what you want chart, if you could have a spike in getting what you want, but you lose it, would you take it? So when you take the derivative of that, right, this is the corresponding happiness chart, you would feel a lot of happiness, and then you would feel the same amount of unhappiness, and then you would go back to your base level happiness, whatever that is for you. My whole thesis is that, yes, this is a very good deal. This is something everyone should seek. But if you said, well, no, that's not worth it, they just like cancel out, so why bother? I would say you're wrong and you're lying. And the reason I know that is because you do this with love. Love is just another drug, right? It's like a commonly known expression, oh, love is a drug. And that, that's like scientifically proven that the way the human brain and the chemicals respond to being in love and being in relationships is the same as being addicted to drugs. So, this drug addict who's doing his lines of coke, you're doing that in your relationships. And so when you find a relationship and you fall in love and you go through this honeymoon phase, you ride this rush up, and then, this doesn't have to be so short. This could be flat for a longer period of time, but, you reach kind of like a stable phase where you're content, and then ultimately, it feels like you're swimming upstream as you take each other for granted and you fall out of love, and then you ultimately break up. And this happens all the time with heterosexual pairings, but this is what the corresponding happiness chart looks like for that. And so every one of your friends and everyone you know is doing this, and they continue to do it. And you would argue that's what life is all about, like celebrities and people who have unlimited power and time, like they're just constantly in and out of relationships, like Ben Affleck and J-Lo, and they're just constantly chasing this rush, and they're just jumping into new relationships. And they do it because if you had endless money and power, you would do it too, because this is what life is about. Riding this wave is fun. There's like an expression, right? Better to have loved and lost than never loved at all. People believe that, so that's why they do it. And if you believe in that expression, then I think it would make sense for you to also pursue that. So I guess kind of going off of this concept of relationships, there's a couple like variants to it, which I thought I'd go into because I thought it'd be funny. There's like friends with benefits. So, when you compare it to the other one, not friends with benefits like outright, but if you want to wean off of a relationship and you don't want it to be as painful as this, where you have to feel this like sharp, acute pain, and people try to find ways around having to suffer through this while still getting the upside. So one way is that they'll rather than just break up cold turkey, they'll be like, oh, let's just be friends with benefits. And that's that's this attempt to kind of like drag it out longer. And the benefit of that is that, while you got to enjoy this high when you were falling in love, this the painful part of having to get over them when you lose them, it just dragged out. It's like, it's flatter. It's flatter but longer, and that's the trade-off. Just like if you're going through withdrawal with some drug addiction, you can just cold turkey go through the pain and then get over it, or you can kind of like wean off of it. So that's like a friends with benefits proposal way of trying to get over a relationship. Another way would be like when people get back together and then break up, and that's more of like a like something that looks like this maybe. And that's, people do that, right? Like they get back together and they break up and they get back together. And if you try to plot the derivative of it, it probably looks something like this. You get the little spikes of happiness, but then it's still net negative. But at least the oscillation kind of like washes out, and like it's better than just like all pain. And another common one, arguably unethical, is trying to rebound. So you get this like this is like your original relationship, and in order to offset the pain of this part going down, you start a new relationship which like perfectly offsets it. So that these two, the sum of these two is like flat. And the problem is that if this one ends, then you need to have another rebound. And people do this. They're serial daters. So they just are constantly trying to monkey branch from one person to the other as the previous relationship is ending. And in this way, like if you were to just graph the sum of this top part would just be flat. But as we learned from the original concept, you take the derivative of this is the happiness chart. You would think, oh, is this gonna just keep me happy? But it isn't. Because when this top part is flat, the derivative of that is actually zero. So you go back down here. However, this is actually superior to than the other aforementioned techniques, because you can actually stay here at zero. You don't actually have to go through like a withdrawal period, because you're riding the honeymoon phase up in your new relationship all the time, offsetting the breakup. So this is why like rebounding is like a common coping mechanism for people who are in relationships and want to continuously chase these waves up in the honeymoon stages of meeting new people and being in new relationships. So like I guess that's kind of going off on a tangent, but how does this apply to me being homeless willingly? So I have this other chart up here. So basically, I apply these concepts. Not just to love and other things like that. I apply it to everything. So I think we've agreed that money buys happiness, and I believe in like a concept that I'm coining called bursty spending, which is kind of like the intermittent fasting of spending, like an intermittent fasting of money. Basically, if you're a normal dude and you just eat Chipotle, like 5 days a week, like I would prefer to drink Soylent all those days, and then like 1 day a week eat fine dining at like a fancy restaurant, because you have fixed amount of money, right? And the Soylent is cheaper than Chipotle. Maybe we should spread this out to a month, because I don't know how much fine dining you're gonna get from saving whatever this would be, $10 a day. I guess that's like $70. That's not that fine dining. But let's say you do this over a month, right? Then you can go to a fancy Michelin star restaurant 1 day a month, and then you're drinking Soylent the rest of the month. So I would take this Soylent fine dining chart over this Chipotle one, which the average person would do. And like, so I'm choosing to ride this wave like this, whereas like a normal person wouldn't. They just can't conceptualize how that would be better for them. But they do get it when it comes to matters of love, right? Like, this is what you do in a relationship. You can just stay single your whole life, and you would be doing the equivalent of eating Chipotle every day. But you like riding that wave, and I'm doing that with my Soylent to fine dining. And then, you can apply that to like lodging, right? Like, so we're finally getting to the crux of my whole video. Like, I am choosing to be homeless, like, let's say every day of the month except for one weekend, and then I'm going to book a fancy Airbnb for one weekend, and a normal person's choosing the apartment. And so when you take the derivative of that, again, same concept. They're just flat. Their happiness is just flat. They're used to their apartment. For me, I'm going to get used to being homeless. Like, human beings are quite adaptive creatures. Like, people who go to prison get used to being in prison. Like, they get used to being in a cell with like a crappy little twin bed with their bunkmate, and like having their bunkmate like take a crap next to them. Like, they get used to this. They get used to the routines of being in prison. So your happiness is going to be flat in any routine. But then you get to ride this wave up to the fancy Airbnb, which is like, imagine the head rush here. And so that's the happiness spike you feel right here. And then you have to go through the withdrawal of going back into your car after that weekend's over. But we're in agreement that this is worth it, right? Like, basically, you get to unlock this experience up here, and this experience, and for what it's worth, is a negative experience with a high magnitude still an experience worth having in life? I would say it is. That's what life's about. It's about getting to experience these points. So yeah, that's kind of the gist on my philosophy on the right way to live life to maximize for, enriching experiences, and likewise happiness, because you simply can't unlock this if you if you don't really ride the wave from homeless to fancy Airbnb. Even apartment to fancy Airbnb, it's not the same spike, because you're not going from homeless to fancy Airbnb. There's this quote from the movie Vanilla Sky. I'm sure it's not from that movie. I've heard other people say it.
Without the bitter, baby, the sweet ain't as sweet.
Yeah, I subscribe to that theory, and mathematically, that theory actually makes sense. So you might ask, like, why can't you just do these things with a job? Like, why do you have to be homeless? And that's actually a great question. You're right. You don't have to be homeless. The reason I'm doing it in this way is because it's mostly has to do with age. Basically, if you're young, you can. In fact, I would recommend you just do this while working. There's no reason why you can't live like this and apply a lot of these principles while maintaining a job. There's a girl who I saw like a YouTube video about it, and she works at Google, and she lives in an RV in San Francisco, and I guess commutes to work. But she's saving a ton of money, like probably $5,000 a month in rent. And, if I were her age, I would probably do something like that too. But for me, it wasn't just age. It was also, I worked in quant finance, so I had a whole work from home setup. I had multiple monitors, and it's not really the type of thing you can do living in your car. But if I were in her situation, I would, given that opportunity. And the other factor for me is just that, at my age, I have more money than time, and it's not really, it doesn't really make sense for me to make that trade, to trade my time for money. But if I were young like her, I certainly would. I would definitely trade time for money, because when you're young, you have a lot of time and less money, and when you're old, if you plan your life correctly, you have a lot of money and less time. So yeah, hopefully that helps explain why I think that, the homeless life is going to be a more enriching, fulfilling experience for me on my life journey. So, hopefully you join me on the journey.